recommend that you do is set the context for this ballpark. You know, this site is a special site in a lot of ways because it represents a return of baseball to its roots in Denver. Some of the local historians will tell you that one of the first professional ballparks in Denver was located just a handful of blocks from our right field entrance over on 32nd and Larimer Street back in the 1800s, 1880 I think it was. A park called the Denver Baseball Park featured games between teams like the Denvers, I think it was the Denvers versus the Pueblo Pastimes, etc. So there is some history to baseball's presence here in this neighborhood, and it's a return of baseball to bring Coors Field here. What we wanted to do was to go back to a very traditional setting for baseball. You know, it's the kind of place, unlike the ones that were built in the 1970s, that were multi-purpose facilities devoid of any kind of intimacy, any special qualities or characteristics that are traditional in baseball. What we wanted to do was to go back to the Ebbets Fields and the Wrigley Fields and the Shea Parks, or I should say the Shy Parks, places like that were a special part of baseball's history. And so when we selected this site, we knew we had an opportunity to do that. This is an historic area of Denver. It was an area that was the early commerce center of Denver. A lot of old warehouse buildings were here 100 years ago. What we wanted to do was to let the history and the architecture of this neighborhood drive a lot of the design decisions for the buildings behind us. We started with a base of cut stone, as many of the buildings did in this neighborhood a century ago. That stone comes from 3 different quarries up near Lyons, Colorado, so it's a Colorado product. On top of that is a red brick that we selected from Robinson Brick here in Denver because it is very typical of the brick that were used in the construction of warehouse buildings 100 years ago. Up here where you see the mosaic pattern to the brick at mid-level in the building, that is something that was suggested by one or more of the landmarks in this neighborhood, specifically the old Beatrice Ice House down here at 18th and Wine Coop. 100 years ago, they would often break up the scale of a large brick building, make it more human in scale, if you will, by varying the pattern of brick. Some people call it chromatic brick patterns, others mosaic pattern, but what it does is it makes the building a little more pleasing to look at. And it makes the building a little less overwhelming to fans, and that was an important consideration. What we wanted to do was to design a building that didn't overwhelm the neighborhood around here. You can see that the brickwork goes up about 5 stories, and that's in a sympathetic scale with a lot of the buildings in the neighborhood. This building over here, the Chaffa building, is relatively new, but if you look over here, for instance, the one that says public storage, that's 6 stories. Down the end of this street here, now part of the ballpark, is a 5-story warehouse building that's been there since the early 1900s. And so a lot of the buildings in the neighborhood were in that scale of 5 stories or so. So we've designed a building that has the masonry going up about 5 stories. Of course, at the top of each of these columns around the ballpark, you see the rosette of the Colorado columbine, the state's national flower, the state flower, I should say. And those were made by an artist who works out of a very small studio behind the state capitol. In Texas, one of the things they did, and a lot of people said, what are you going to do that's going to be Colorado in flavor? Well, we thought the state's wildflower. You give tours, I would recommend that you describe that neighborhood and how it had its impact on this ballpark, because it's all part of the authenticity of Coors Field. This is a building that it's not the kind of building that can be plopped down anywhere, including alongside of a highway out in the middle of nowhere, as they did in Arlington. It's a new ballpark. This is a ballpark that was shaped by its neighborhood. And that's traditional in baseball as well. You think about a place like Fenway Park in Boston. Most baseball fans respond, oh, the Green Monster. That's that wall down the left field line that is a huge wall that was necessitated by the fact that the neighborhood development around the ballpark prevented the ballpark from being extended any further down the left field line. And so to take away the cheap home runs, they put up this huge green wall. Well, that's become part of the identity of that ballpark. The neighborhood around it has shaped Fenway Park, and has in the other ballparks such as Wrigley Field in Chicago and some of the old ones like Evans Field, etc. This ballpark also takes its identity from the neighborhood around it. And that's why before you even get people in the building, one of the things I would recommend is you spend some time talking about the neighborhood and how it really shaped Coors Field. A couple of points around us here. Across the street here, that building is the building that will house the new substation, power station for the Public Service Company. Public Service had identified that location as being important for its future power needs before baseball came down here. And to the credit of Public Service Company, when they found out that baseball was coming down, one of the things they agreed to do was to push the building to the far corner of the lot, as they've done, and enclose it in architecture that reflects the neighborhood. In fact, they've already fooled some people. I had a fellow come up to me one day and say, boy, I'm sure glad they cleaned up that old building. It used to look terrible. Well, that old building is only about 3 months old. So what they've done in working with the neighborhood, just as we've done, is to design a building that responds to the history and the tradition and the architecture of the neighborhood. This building over here, the public storage building, is, as the name implies, a storage facility, but I think the chances for that remaining that way are probably unlikely. It's a great building for things like condominiums or residential loft developments and probably office developments. But right now, they plan to continue that as a storage building. As I said, down at the end of this block at the corner, 22nd and Blake, is the old warehouse building that's been there since the early 1900s. It was formerly known as the Banker Storage Building. It was one of the buildings that the neighborhood came to us and said, when you build Coors Field, we would like you to find some way to incorporate the existing fabric of the neighborhood in the ballpark. You know, that started, I think, in Baltimore, where our architects, HOK, were able to preserve the old B&O warehouse, that spectacular quarter-mile long warehouse building that runs parallel to the outfield fence, and utilize it as part of the ballpark. Well, the neighborhood came to us and said, there ought to be some way that you can save some of the buildings. Most of the ballpark here at Coors Field was an old railroad yard. Very little demolition was required. However, along the frontage of the ballpark here, between 20th and 22nd, there were a series of basically 1- and 2-story brick buildings, most of them wood frames inside, that occupied the site. And people asked us to save as many of those as we could. Well, because of fire safety issues, ADA accessibility issues, etc., most of them we could not save. But we did save 3 important buildings on the site. First of all, over here you see the old Union Pacific building and warehouse, which is being redeveloped as we speak. That building was acquired when we bought the land. We turned around and sold it to a developer who is making it office condominium units. The back portion where the warehouse is will be restaurants. Frank Day, who owns the Rock Bottom Brewery, the old Chicago outlets, and a number of other very successful restaurants, is opening something I think he's going to call the Western Pacific Chop House, which is an old-style railroad dining facility of the type that appeals to families. There's also a brew pub going in there, as there are in many different locations around the neighborhood. But that building is one that was preserved. Secondly, right where we're standing, for about 60 years, was one of the first gas stations in Denver. It was a little 1-story brick structure, Gary. It was covered by 60 years of the institutional white paint that gas stations love to be painted. We scraped all that paint off, and we found that the brick was really pretty attractive. It was a glazed brown brick. And so we have taken that gas station apart brick by brick. It was put in storage, and it'll be reconstructed. Not on this corner here, because we didn't want to present any more congestion at the home plate entrance than is likely to be here anyhow. But it's going to be reconstructed at the right field entrance down at 22nd and Blake, and there it'll gain new life as a day game souvenir shop, probably an additional ticket window, etc. And then the final building is, of course, the old warehouse building that is at the right field entrance to Coors Field. And I think most of you know we sliced the back corner of that building off, and it now nestles up right against the concourse that we're going to be on in just a minute. It is functionally and architecturally part of Coors Field. The ground floor of that 5-story building is going to house the first brewery in a ballpark. I think most of you know that Coors is opening something called the Sandlot Brewery, and it'll also be a restaurant on that ground floor. The upper floors will be the concessionaire's kitchen for the stadium club. The stadium district offices will be there very soon. The cooling plant for the ballpark, so it is now part of Coors Field. And remind me when we get inside, and I'll talk to you a little bit about the public art that's going to be on the exterior. But those are 3 buildings that we were able to incorporate into the ballpark, and again, to reflect the history and the tradition and the fabric and the architecture of this neighborhood in a way that legitimizes Coors Field as an authentic, old-time, traditional ballpark. Any questions before we go inside? Okay, watch your step when we go in. Please remember, it's a construction site. There are a lot of hazards, and I'll try to get you in and out safely without me. There was a period of time in which we thought that we might put into the plaza area out here the brick pavers that people bought to underwrite the cost of public art. The problem with that, I think, is obvious, and that is that on game day, when this is a very active place, you'd have people standing around, pardon me, that you're standing on my brick, and it would create a lot of congestion. So what we did instead, though, we wanted them to be part of a public area that's accessible, whether it's baseball season or not. So what we've done is we've placed them in the pedestrian walkway that runs parallel to the old Union Pacific building on the way into the left field entrance. Most of that brick walkway is paved with the old brick pavers that were in that railroad yard 100 years ago. When we were redeveloping that space, we took those pavers up, put them in storage, and then we laid a new foundation, of course, and then put those pavers back where they were 100 years ago. The last section of that walkway as you enter left field is going to be where the bricks will be laid out, and they'll be laid out in the shape of a baseball diamond. So as you walk along, you'll be able to see your name laid out in the area of third base dugout or left field or whatever it might be in that walkway. And that'll again be a public area year round. Here in the ballpark, one of the things we wanted to do was to make it a very public building as much as possible, so that if it's a day in which baseball is not being played, you still have the ability to come down and at least look into the ballpark. On game days, if you don't have a ticket, you can come down here, and this becomes what the architects call the modern day knothole. You think about back in the old days of baseball where kids who couldn't afford to get in, they found a spot in the outfield fence where they had a knothole in the wood and they were able to look in and watch part of the game. Well, at each of the entry points, what we've tried to do, wherever possible, is to make it easy to look in and at least see some of the crowd. You know, for instance, this will be where the big iron gates will be, the old-fashioned picket gates. And you'll be able to look in, and here you can see some of the crowd. Here you can see from over in this direction. Here you see the bullpens, and it gives you an opportunity to become part of the excitement of the game, even if you don't have a ticket. And that's all part of activating the street, is what the architects like to call it. Is it makes it a very vibrant place to be, even if you don't have a ticket into the game. So the year-round, regardless of whether it's baseball season or not, a workforce of some 100 people will be coming down here to conduct business. Along Blake Street, again, as part of the goal of activating the street, we have the year-round ticket store, a year-round souvenir shop, the Colorado Dugout store, the year-round baseball museum, and then, of course, down at the end of the field, the year-round restaurant and brew pub in the old warehouse building. I will give to Bob some notes that I've drawn up for people in the past who've been a part of tours, so that we're going to move through this very quickly today because I know you're all cold and I don't want to spend any more time than we have to, but I'll give you a series of notes that will give you a lot of the information that we're talking about.
Thank you very much.
First of all, where we're standing right now is one of the principal design elements of the ballpark because it's a concourse that wraps all the way around the playing surface. And the benefit of that, I think, is obvious. It means that if you come up to use these restrooms or concession stands next year and you hear the crowd start to roar, you can turn and look right down into the field in time to see Eric Young rounding second or whatever it is that's caused the crowd to react. This is one of the few things we took from the new Comiskey Park design in Chicago. By and large, we didn't like the new Comiskey Park. It's more modern than we wanted, but we did like the idea of an open concourse that completely circles the field. One of the things you'll find next year is that during a game, there is a lot of mobility to this ballpark. First of all, it starts just as you enter the ballpark. There are 5 main entry points. Left field over here at Winecoop Street will be a major pedestrian link with lower downtown. Home plate, where you just entered by tradition, is an area where people flock to as part of baseball, particularly given the fact that this architecture here will have the clock, and I think a lot of people will say, I'll meet you under the clock at home plate entrance before the game. First base entrance over here at 21st and Blake architecturally is more elaborate than the others because we wanted to call attention to the mountain views that are spectacular out to the west. Right field, where we were talking about earlier, the old warehouse building is growing in prominence. Initially, we didn't think that that was going to be an important entryway, but now a lot of the development that's taking place down there, Breckwith Brew Pub, Gate 12, and some of the others indicates that a lot of fans will be coming into that entry point. And then center field, where most of the on-site parking is. But the Rockies will permit fans to enter any single one of the gates that they choose. There won't be any restrictions based on ticket price or seating location or anything of that sort.
Oh, no.
Let's watch this guy here. See where he's
Oh, man, there's a scoreboard for this.
I think it's close. Yeah, let's go back because he's going to come around behind us. Up here are designed to recall the old light fixtures that were here as part of the warehouse district a century ago. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that I overlooked when we were out there was to tell you about our goal was not only to build the ballpark, but our goal was to contribute to the redevelopment of the neighborhood around the ballpark that makes it a pleasant place for fans to be as pedestrians. You know, this is a ballpark that really encourages fans to come to it and from it as a pedestrian. You know, it's not located out in the middle of nowhere like Kansas City's is, where you have only one choice, and that's to drive. And there's never really been any development around the ballpark. Well, here, we're going back to the tradition of urban baseball, which really makes it a pleasant place for people to be when they're not making noise. The ballpark and all the key pedestrian corridors, and we've identified those based on about 3 years worth of traffic studies in which we'll identify where fans are coming. We are widening sidewalks, we're planting street trees, we're putting in that type of lighting that you're talking about because it's very special to the neighborhood.
Is that the green ones on the?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you know what they look like? They're designed to recall the lamps that were on loading docks and still are down in this area.
Sorry.
That had the bars around them to protect the lights from being damaged by freight and things of that sort. And so it's very typical of this neighborhood. And so the key pedestrian corridors around the ballpark, Blake Street in particular, 21st all the way down to Arapahoe, are being redeveloped into areas that fans will feel very comfortable walking to and from. But as we get into the ballpark, we talked about, this is a design we took from new Comiskey Park in Chicago, and we wanted to keep the open view into the field. Behind you here are all the restrooms and concession stands, pushed on what they call the outboard side of the concourse. And the purpose is, again, to preserve the open view into the field. The restrooms and concession stands are the most modern available. And one of the things I talk about a lot about Coors Field is that there is sort of a creative tension, if you will, here, in that we have an old-time ballpark environment. But within that, what we wanted to do is take advantage of modern design elements and planning to make it a comfortable experience for fans. And one of the things we've done, for instance, is to add more restrooms for women than men, because that makes sense. Yes. You know, a lot of women will tell you that over at Mile High and in many sports facilities, there are always the long lines outside the women's restrooms. Well, here we've added more restrooms for women because that makes sense. We also have something called family restrooms, which are private restrooms, about 8 in number, scattered throughout the ballpark. They serve 2 functions. First of all, if you happen to have a friend or family member who's in a wheelchair, you can help them take care of their needs in the privacy of a family restroom. It's also important in today's society where you have a lot of single parents to help somebody. Let's say, for instance, I take my daughter to the game, and she's too old anymore to be brought into the men's room, but I don't want to send her into the ladies' room alone because she won't come out for 3 innings. Well, now I'll be able to take her into a family restroom and take care of that need. So that's an idea of how, or an indication, I should say, how we use modern planning elements and design elements within the old-time ballpark context. Let's go down here on the seating boat. Watch your step. There's a lot of ice and snow on these stairs. And see, and you may know, by the way, that we have already targeted the lights, and we've tested them both day and night. They were on for the first time this past week. But below the lights, you see a sunscreen, which is that brief roof-like portion to the ballpark that is traditional in baseball, and it gives fans in the upper deck some relief from the sun. But it also serves another function as well. It's sort of the design cap to the ballpark. It gives the ballpark its finished look. And I like to think of it as something that contributes to the elusive quality of intimacy that people always talk about when they design ballparks these days. If you think about being over at Mile High, if you sit in the upper deck, you have the wide open sky above you, and you don't really feel like you're in a place of any definition or any limits. The sunscreen here makes you feel like you are more connected with the structure, and that there are certain limits to the structure that give you a sense of intimacy. And that's what this sunscreen does, in addition to providing the obvious protection to the fans. If you look at the upper deck, about 6 rows from the top, you see a different color seats. Those are the Mile High seats, of course, I think you all know about. They're Rockies purple in color, and they're designed to mark that row that's exactly 5,280 feet above sea level. Below that, you see about 3/4 of the way down the portals that lead to the upper concourse. Now up there, we did the reverse of what we did down here. The upper concourse, we took the restrooms and concession stands and we tucked them on the inboard side of the concourse to preserve an open view to the skyline in this direction and the mountains over here. And I always tell people that regardless of where you sit, you really owe it to yourself to make a trip to the upper concourse, because the skyline views of Denver in this direction and the mountains have been spectacular. The past 2 years that we've been building it, we've seen some amazing sunsets. And it'll be the kind of place, if you have friends or relatives come into Colorado for the first time, bring them down here to see their first sunset. You'll never forget it. By the way, I should have pointed out that one of the concepts, again, of modern design elements within the old-time ballpark is that we try to make it very easy for fans to move about the ballpark very easily, not only on this concourse here, and the fact that you can enter any gate, but at the main entrances you have everything from stairs, ramps, escalators, and elevators, so you can move vertically, as the planners like to say. And so it is very easy, for instance, if you're sitting down here, to go over and grab an escalator and go up to the upper deck and enjoy the view from the plaza that extends out over the home plate entry. As you can tell, the upper deck comes down about another 7 rows and overhangs by quite a bit the next layer, which is a single layer of luxury boxes. If you look over here, for instance, tucked underneath the upper deck are the luxury boxes. There are 58 of them, and that number, by the way, you'll see will vary, and it depends on whether you count boxes that can be subdivided. Down the lines here, left field line in particular, there are boxes that are available on a day-of-game basis, or a game-by-game basis, I should say, rather than season ticket subscription. A typical box is 12 seats. 2 rows of 6 seats are located on this side of the glass doors, so that fans who have luxury boxes can either watch the game from outdoors, underneath the overhang of the upper deck, or they can go through the double glass doors and watch the game from in their suite. Those ran something in the range of $70,000 to $100,000 a year and a minimum 3-year commitment, but the Rockies can verify all those dollar figures for you.
What's the one game at a time box?
I'm not sure what they're going to rent it as, and it also depends. It can be subdivided, so it depends on the size of the box as well. That's why I say you need to check that with the Rockies ticket sales people. The next layer down is the one that's jutting out here at what used to be press box level, and that is the club level seats that you've heard so much about. Those are $26 seats. And those, by the way, offer some great views of the game. This past summer, when the players were on strike, we had Don Baylor down here from time to time, and we often found him sitting up here in the club level seats, watching the sun and wind patterns. And Don thinks that those are the best seats in the ballpark, but he, I think, makes a good point that the views up there are really spectacular. You also pay for the amenities, of course, behind that. The glass enclosed area at the top of the seating bowl for the club level seats is the area where there are special lounges and wet restrooms and things of that sort. That are amenities that cause those seats to be more expensive. Those are the $26 seats. By the way, at that level, if you turn around and look behind us, you have a 2-tiered press box. The lower level with the large windows is the print media, the writing press, and then right above that where you see the smaller windows, that indicates the TV and radio booths. So those boxes are right behind you for all the media.
Will those windows open?
Yes. They open differently. These swing up and latch on the ceiling. The other ones fold across accordion style. Finally is lower level seating where we are right now. If you look out here, you can see the dark green wall with a block wall that's being constructed above that. That's the batter's eye. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with that term, the batter's eye is that area of center field where the league no longer allows seating below a certain point. Even at old ballparks such as Wrigley Field in Chicago, next time you turn it on a game on TV, and you'll see that they've taken seats out of center field in Wrigley Field to give the batter a plain background to look at as he faces a pitcher who's about to throw a fastball at him at 95 miles an hour. It helps to be able to pick up that ball coming in if you're looking at a backdrop of a solid color. We will still utilize that space, though. If you look at the foot of that, you'll see the structure for the outfield wall going across there, and behind that, you see some grass. That's because that's a sod farm. We'll grow sod on site right behind the center field fence so that when repairs are needed in the field, the groundskeeper just goes right behind there and pick up a piece of sod to transplant it into the field. From the batter's eye, though, extending over here to the field access tunnel down the left field line where the maintenance vehicles enter and exit the playing surface, that is the bleacher section underneath the scoreboard out there. It is a bench with a back to it, and they go no higher than the concourse, again to preserve that open view from the concourse into the field. The scoreboard, as you can tell, is a very modern electronic scoreboard. What you see in the middle where it says on the Galarraga's stats, that is called the black and white matrix board. That's where the line score will be. It does have animation capability, so they can do quite a bit with that. But right above that, above the word where you see Sony, is the color video board, the Sony Jumbotron, and they were testing that today, and it's really spectacular color. The panels on both sides of the black and white board will be advertising, as will the other smaller green panels. You can see the Coke bottle ad is going in over to the left of the matrix board. Then from the foul pole, wrapping around to where we are now and continuing on in the right center field is lower level seating. There are about 19,000 seats, a little under 19,000 seats in this lower level. And they stop out in right center field because that's where the bullpens are located. The bullpens are elevated above the field by 5 feet so that you get a good view of who's warming up for the Rockies, who will throw on this end, and the visitors who will throw on the end where the McDonald's ad is. Then the last piece of seating, of course, is the famous rock pile, which is rising up from the center field concourse there. The rock pile is a very traditional bleacher section modeled much like the bleacher section at Wrigley Field in Chicago. It is a bleacher bench with no back to it. There are about 2,300 seats out there, and I think most of you know that those are day game sales only. $1 seats for seniors and kids, $4 seats for everybody else. The field is 21 feet below Blake Street, where you were standing a minute ago. And again, this is a natural bowl. One of the reasons that we like this site was, again, it allowed us to have a field that is below street level, and that in turn keeps the whole profile of the ballpark as low as possible and prevents it from overwhelming the rest of the neighborhood. The field, we had to do very little excavation because it was a natural bowl, and for that reason, we found very little in terms of artifacts. The charred remains of the first rail passenger depot built in Denver back in the 1870s were found down the right field line there. It was the old Denver Pacific Rail Depot, and we found some of the rubble from that. It burned down, I think, in the 1880s. The only other thing we found of any significance were the dinosaur bones in the area of the Rockies dugout. And we really didn't even uncover those through excavation. That was where the Rockies dugout was the side of a hill or an escarpment. And one day, one of our workers was walking by it right after we'd had some heavy rains, and he noticed about 4 or 5 feet down from the top that there was a bed of sandstone in which there was something sticking out of it. He thought it looked unusual, and he pried it out, and it was a 6-inch bone. Well, the Stadium District, as the subdivision of the state of Colorado, has an obligation under state law to turn over anything of any apparent significance to the state archaeologist. And so they called me and brought it over to my office, and I was a little bit hesitant to do this because this was right about the time that Jurassic Park fever was at its height. And I thought to myself, these guys are going to make fun of me when I bring this out there. They're going to say, oh yeah, that's a rib bone about 2 weeks old in origin. But I had to do it, so I went out to the Museum of Natural History, and to their paleontologist. He looked at it, handed it back to me, and said 66 million years old. And it is not untypical. I think most of you who've been in Colorado any length of time know that there are quite often found dinosaur deposits along the Front Range here, and that was the only one that we found. We did find some plant fossils as well. We had the paleontologists and some of their crew from the Museum of Natural History out here digging right along with us when we were excavating. They were very, very helpful. They did not try to stop the project or halt or hinder it in any way, but they never found anything else besides that. Again, we didn't have to dig down very far. But once the playing surface was finally leveled, we started with spreading a layer of special soil and sand on the raw soil. On top of that, we put heating coils. The entire surface, with the exception of the warning track, can be heated to a temperature of 58 degrees. So that on days like today, for instance, when you have the potential for snow that could interrupt a game, all they have to do is flick a switch and they can heat the surface. And then at that point, the drainage takes place at the rate of about 5 inches of moisture an hour, so that it makes the surface very playable even in the worst of conditions. On top of that, we brought a special soil, and this again is a Colorado product. It is a very sandy type of soil that comes from up near Longmont. And then on top of that, of course, was the transplanted in October of last year, the grass that is actually 6 strains of grass, 4 strains of bluegrass, and then they cross-sowed in the opposite direction 2 strains of rye, so that there was a uniformity and an appearance to the grass that is exactly right, and it's also disease-resistant and things of that sort. The warning track is a very traditional warning track in the sense that it is a crushed rock rather than the rubberized warning track that they had to have over a mile high because of the movable stands. But also in Baltimore, they used a rubber warning track, and I'm not really sure why they did that. The players actually prefer this kind of warning track. This is a crushed red volcanic rock set in the base of red clay. Both those materials come from down near Colorado Springs. And the players prefer this because when they dive for a ball on this warning track, they can slide to a gradual stop. On a rubberized warning track, when a player dives, he stops so fast that he can dislocate a shoulder or create a more serious injury. So we've used a very traditional warning track that, of course, encircles the entire playing surface.
Tom,
Yes.
question on the wall. It doesn't look like it's going to give very much.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah. The outfield wall is just going to get you is 8 feet tall. From this foul pole all the way over here until the right field wall has something else happening there, and I'll tell you about that in just a minute. But it is, as you can see, a concrete wall with a railing on top of that. It will have padding that is prescribed by the league, so that the player who hits it obviously is going to be protected. But it's only 8 feet tall for the purpose of allowing those thrilling plays in which an outfielder leaps up and brings back into the field of play a ball that's headed out of the ballpark. Over down here at the right field line, though, there's a different thing happening, and that is where there is a manually operated scoreboard built right into the right field wall. There you can see the grill work going in that will have somebody standing behind it slipping the numbers into place as the scores come in from around both the American and the National League. You'll get the abbreviated name of each team that's playing. You'll get the number of the inning that's currently being played. You'll get the score, of course, and then you'll get the number for each pitcher who is in for each team. And all that will take place in the top row of the right field wall. Below that, you can see that white section where it looks like the start of a bench. That's where the Rockies bench will be for their bullpen. And then over where the plastic is a field level box. It's an area that's rentable for small groups. And there, fans are seated right at field level looking